Hello everyone, welcome to this week's DevOps Chat. I'm really delighted to have with me Jose Casal and Luke Hohmann. Many of you will remember that we've had Jose before. So Jose, you are the second person who has come back to be a guest of ours again. You enjoyed it so much the first time. And Luke, you're obviously new to this. Really pleased to have you both here. We're going to talk about collaboration frameworks, but maybe before we do that, it would be interesting for people to hear a bit about your background and what your interests are and what enthuses you. So Luke, if you'd like to kick off.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here with you. Even though it's virtual, I feel connected to you through the power of the internet. I'm the founder and CEO of Contenio, and our platforms help companies identify, shape, and align on internal priorities and customer priorities to increase engagement and improve effectiveness. And it doesn't really matter what particular flavor of Agile you practice, priorities matter, and understanding them and aligning people to them so that they can build the right things is critically important. You asked about my passion. In addition to my background in the Agile community, which includes serving on the board of the Agile Alliance and helping create the first Agile conference with Alistair Coburn and Ken Schwaber back in 2003. I also am co-founder of a nonprofit, Every Voice Engaged Foundation, which uses collaboration frameworks to help citizens engage with each other and their governments to produce better outcomes for our democracies.
Wow, fantastic. So thank you. Now, Jose, you've had some time to think of what you're going to tell us. Do you want to give people just a quick history?
I could point out people to my previous presentation, but that's okay. So yeah, like Hugh as well, like Luke says, I'm also part of the Agile community. I've been involved in Agile for about 10 years now, as long as Luke. Working in Scrum, Kanban, and the different methods in a very method agnostic way. I chair the BCS Agile Specialist Group here in the UK, which is a method agnostic community. And I run a number of conferences, including Playing Camp based on all things collaborative, but basically very much about collaboration frameworks. Luke and I met randomly in 2012, and I heard him talk about the work that he was doing with communities, helping communities decide what to do, collaborate, get better decisions also. And from that moment, I was completely captivated by it. So I've been following Luke's work and all the tools and the techniques that we have in this space, and it's just something that is fascinating and gets me very, very inspired.
Fantastic. So let's jump straight in then. Now, one thing that occurred to me is that in probably all of the DevOps chats we've had, collaboration, getting people working more closely together, it's pretty much always come out as one of the themes. And I think it was the first or second DevOps chat we had was specifically about collaboration tooling. So we're going to talk about collaboration frameworks. And I'm completely out of my depth already. So perhaps, Luke, you can kick off with sort of explaining a bit about what you mean when you talk about collaboration frameworks.
Yeah, well, let's start with your prior conversations about collaboration, and let's tease out some really important distinctions. First, one of the challenges we have with collaboration is that people confuse communication, coordination, and collaboration. What we're doing right now is we're having a conversation or we're communicating with each other, but we're not collaborating per se because there's not a goal-driven problem that we're using some technique to help solve. People also confuse coordination with collaboration. So the distinction I like to make, and the example of the three that are important is, let's say that you were working in an IT shop or a product development shop, and you wanted to improve your architecture, perhaps to reduce your deployment pain or your deployment processes, and you're thinking, gosh, let's go with DevOps. And your boss says, or the leadership says, that sounds like a good idea. Jose, go run that project. Well, right now, let's talk about what needs to happen. First, there's project management, which is coordination. Jose has to plan out the project. He has to, and it's like not planning it out in an unagile way, but someone has to kind of kick things off. They have to kind of identify some reasonable resources, kind of understand what's going on, do a little bit of it. That's coordination. To frame the desires of the company, he might run a Zoom meeting like we're running now, and communicate the goals and answer questions. Again, that's not collaboration. Collaboration kicks in when the team needs to say, well, what's the sequence that we think is the best sequence? And then they might use a framework, prune the product tree, to talk about the evolution and growth. Or they might have the question that in Jose's project plan says, we have to identify what would hold us back from implementing a robust DevOps solution. So to answer that question, you would like to engage the team in a collaborative discussion. That's where we would use a sailboat or a speedboat and say, let's run a retrospective. And now we get into the notion of a collaborative framework, which is a tool that knowledge workers use to solve a problem. So frameworks are the screwdrivers, the pliers, the wrenches, the sockets of knowledge workers. And that's why we need a lot of them, because there's a lot of different problems that we're facing at work.
Okay, wow. Okay, so that's really, there's a lot of information, and it's very interesting. I'm wondering so when you first tackle this subject with people who are new to it, where do you start? How do you get people to understand this as an area? Maybe I don't know, Jose or Luke, you want to respond to that?
I mean, it's a very interesting question, because I think as Luke was saying, we sometimes don't have a very, very clear understanding of what really means to be collaborating. Okay. One thing, so having a very clear understanding of what collaboration means and what do you see by collaboration is kind of like a very interesting conversation. What was the question?
Well, the question was, as I heard it, and it was, how do you get people started on this concept? And I think one answer is you don't have to make a big deal about it, David. You start with a very fundamental, meta question. What's your goal? Mm-hmm. Like, what problem are you trying to solve, and what are you going to do with that result? And who needs to be involved? Right? If you can understand the goal, which is almost always a verb, I want to prioritize, I want to identify, I want to discover, I want to plan, I want to improve. And then you can get to the noun. What? I want to prioritize my backlog. I want to prioritize my epics. I want to prioritize my technical debt. I want to prioritize the investments I'm making in my development organization. I want to discover unmet needs in my customers. Right? Once you understand the verb and the noun and the context, my team is coming together for a strategy planning meeting. My team is distributed in 3 locations around the world, and there's 200 developers involved, or 600 developers, or whatever. Once you understand the verb, the noun, and the context, you can pick a framework that supports the goal of the group. That goal might be building alignment within the team. The goal might be divergent thinking to discover something fresh and new. Behind me, you can see the results of product boxes, which are a framework that helps you identify unmet needs or ideal or optimized solutions. So once you understand that kind of collection of goals, you can, is it sense making? Is it convergence? You can pick a framework that's appropriate. Just kind of like, again, think, it's a simple analogy, but it does work pretty well. You've got a 18-piece screwdriver set. Well, what screwdriver do you need? I don't know. What kind of screw do you have? Do you have a Phillips head, a hex head, or a flathead? I'll go get the right screwdriver when I know the kind of screw you want me to turn.
So that already then, okay, so this takes me on the first step of my journey of understanding then, I think, which is you're saying a collection of people, could be hundreds, could be 2 or 3, have a problem they need to solve. They have to work together to solve it. But what you're saying is there isn't just one one tool, a hammer,
Yeah.
to solve it. There are different approaches you should use depending on the context and depending on what the goal is. Is that what you're saying? So it's not one framework, it's a collection of tools that you can apply to a particular problem where it involves multiple people getting together to solve a problem. Is that right?
It is right. If I say that, so there is a number of different frameworks that can be used, and understanding the kind of problem that we will be facing, then it might help us decide what kind of framework I pick. So, and then you have factors like, physical, whether people are present in the same room or not, what kind of what's the question that you're looking for, how many people do you have, how much preparation do you need? So you might be able to pick a different one. And there's a few of them that you can pick from. One of the key aspects as well of collaboration frameworks or any sort of collaborative environment is that understanding the mechanics of a framework is not particularly difficult, and many times it's about the best way of putting this in practice actually by doing it. Things like a sailboat or a speedboat is a fairly straightforward, very easy framework to put in place. Now, like Luke was saying just now as well, is what are we trying to do? Are we trying to create divergent thinking? Are we trying to generate ideas? Or are we trying to converge into something, from lots of ideas? Most companies have many more ideas than we are capable of doing. So how do we do something to say, can we make a decision here?
And I want to go back to something you mentioned, David, which is really critical. Everyone who goes through our training, and Jose is a certified collaboration instructor, gets a secret tattoo right on their forehead. So every time they look at a mirror, they see the following phrase: after 8, no collaborate. After 8, no collaborate. Humans are biologically wired to collaborate in small groups. It's been popularized lately with Jeff Bezos saying things like, a team should never be larger than what you can feed in 2 pizzas. But we've known this for decades, right? And actually we've studied it for decades, but we've known it for millennia if you look at how military structures have evolved. Mm-hmm. So, there's no Scrum team that's 200 people. There's no Agile team that's 200 people. So one of the more important things to realize is that going back to the project example I gave earlier, if Jose is leading a DevOps initiative for a major organization, he can communicate those goals to hundreds of people because it's informative. It's not collaborative. But the moment we bust up into collaborative structures, we've got to preserve the natural structure of human interaction, which is optimally 2 to 8 people for a collaboration. And it's funny because in the Centennial Weave platform, people say, oh, I'm going online. Now I can collaborate with hundreds. And we'll say, no, now that you're going online, you can collaborate with hundreds in small groups. And to Jose's point about the design, then you have a simple question. Do you have a problem where the existing team structure should be preserved? For example, we work with organizations to do enterprise retrospectives. We'll run dozens and dozens and dozens of teams through online retrospectives, and then we analyze the patterns across the team to find enterprise impediments. So that's a design where you want to preserve team structure that already exists. There are other times where people will say, I'd like to understand how we can be more innovative with the assets that we have. Well, that's where you actually want to mix up team structure, because we know in certain forms of divergent thinking, working with people who are in the same organization creates trust, but working with new people within that same organization creates creative abrasion. And that abrasive process in a trusting context allows really powerful ideas to surface. So it's important to realize that even when we're using online tools, if you want to collaborate, you have to preserve group structure. And, crapping out a comment on Facebook on a post is not a collaboration, right? That doesn't help really create a common bond of understanding and something that the group can solve. So so in addition to what, Jose said, or what you talked about, you have to understand and preserve organizational structure, because that's how humans work. Like, we're wetware. Here's what you get.
And it's quite interesting. A few times there, I think you used the word alignment or buy-in, and so maybe you could talk a bit more about how does it actually feel for people when they are working on something in a collaborative way? How do they experience it?
So I think, the word alignment here is that we have a very clear understanding of what are we trying to work on, and there is I'm gonna use other words as well, like very popular at the moment. We are realizing how important it is to have psychological safety in a work environment, so people can actually, to collaborate, you have to feel safe. You've got to be able to speak your voice and have a dialogue, an exchange of ideas, an exchange of viewpoints. We have to have that alignment is fundamentally important for all of us to be able to say, what are we trying to achieve? But then to have a creative dialogue where different people's ideas come together and we bring us something better than we initially thought about. That is a very basic point of view.
Well, there's other forms of alignment, and building on what Jose said, right? Let's say that the organization has been successful in creating an environment where safety and trust and the ability to speak your mind exists. There's still a requirement that an organization understands roles and responsibilities and handoffs. So taking it a little bit out of the DevOps context, because I think it's a little easier, let's say this is a pricing, and this is the product marketing function, and this is the product management function. I can cite many organizations where pricing lives in one or the other. So you can't prove that one is better than the other, but here's what you can prove. If product marketing thinks they own pricing and product management thinks they own pricing, they fight. Mm-hmm. If product marketing thinks product management owns pricing and product management thinks product marketing owns pricing, it's not done well. Sales does it, and the organization doesn't extract the most amount of revenue because sales is going to choose pricing that optimizes for different numbers than necessarily profit. Mm-hmm. The only workable solution is one group says, I am responsible for pricing, and the other group says, I am aligned with that, and I understand that that's your job and your role. How can I help you? How can I give feedback? How can I be critical if I need to be critical? Mm-hmm. But at the end of the interaction, at the end of the collaboration, part of being in alignment is within the culture of safety and trust that Jose talked about. What you have is you have clarity on things like alignment and who's responsible for what, and who gets to make certain decisions. And this speaks to something that I think the Agile community has gotten a little bit wrong over the years, and that is there's a little bit of anarchy in a lot of Agile, right? We've lost notions of appropriate governance, and the example I use, and I got this from Ken Orr, who is a brilliant person in his earlier work, was this notion that cities work because there are governance structures. I'm building a new street. Great. It's got to have this much sewage and this much power and this much stuff. Now, within that street, we've got lots of beautiful houses, and there's difference in the houses, and there's different paintings, but they are all honoring the governance model of the city. And so, if you're building some trivial toy app that's MVP and cranked out by 2 people in a weekend, fine, who cares? But the people who are listening to this DevOps probably by definition are building more substantial applications in more substantial companies. And to be agile doesn't mean to abdicate the benefits of governance and understanding, like, look, I don't care if you use Docker, but if you're using Docker, you probably need some standards in the team so that Docker is effective. And those standards are there not to prevent creativity, but to enable it. And I think that that's part of this notion of, I've created safety, I've created an environment where I can talk about these things, and I've created alignment. And I think, going back to the actual question you asked, how do people feel about it? They feel great because they can learn that, and they can experience what it's like to be in an environment where you have alignment, what it's like to be in an environment where you have high degrees of engagement and clarity about how to work. That's liberating, and our experience is people love it.
So it's very, so much you've just said there, but it's very close to a topic we discussed 2 DevOps chats ago about teams and how they can work together. And I think, if I understand correctly what you're saying that you need some structure and some clarity around roles and who is responsible for what, and that shouldn't be seen as stifling creativity or collaboration, but actually as enabling it. I thought what was very interesting was you said, even if one department is responsible for something, the other departments need to know, if they want to critique it or provide input, they need to know what the mechanism is for doing that. So I suppose with all of that, I'm starting to see it's much more complicated than I would have initially thought. But I suppose, and I'm conscious of time now, I'd be really interested from both of you to kind of have a top tip. And you've already given one, which is, start with asking what's the goal, what's the purpose, and then work from there. But if you had one other tip to give teams or individuals about how they could improve their collaborative behaviors, what would it be?
Big question. I'll give you one, which is like one thing that we tend to see many times in organizations is that look beyond the team. I mean, you're talking about here teams, for example. So one of the advice that I will give is like look beyond the team. Teams are small, cohesive groups of people, usually 2 pizzas, they can achieve something. But as we said before, probably when we are doing DevOps, we are in much bigger organizations. And usually, I would say that the real opportunities to do significant changes and significant improvements in our organizations lie beyond the teams. Many times is what happens between the teams, which is, again, something that Luke was alluding there. Who does what? And then how can we collaborate in order to together make our organization a better place? So many times friction and problems in the organization and delays happen between teams, not inside the teams. So how can we look beyond the teams and really truly understand how things happen in this organization and how can we make each other better? So I would say that's one advice I will say. Like,
great. Let's give it. Luke's had a chance to think now. Unless Jose's stolen yours, in which case.
No, I was dodging that one long enough to I did the Japanese 9-second pause, and Jose caved, and I knew he would. We teach together, and it's super fun because the classes are just crazy, and our buddy JP also joins in. You asked for one tip, right? And the one tip to improve collaboration, and then you took it away, right? Which you said, okay, I guess let's start with the goal. I think the one tip that I would add is, don't be perfect. Don't try to be more than you need to be or more than you are at where you are. I have this great story where I was coaching one team, and it's related to this concept, right? But I said, okay, do you have personas? And the team was like, oh yeah, personas are a great concept and they're really important. I'm like, oh, okay, so you're aware of personas? Like, oh yeah, they're like, they have a template and a picture. I'm like, okay, great. Where are your personas? And like, oh, well, we don't have any because we don't have the time to do a really perfect one, so we skipped it. I'm like, no. Like, a bad persona is way better than
no.
And a perfect persona is very marginally better than a normal persona. And it happened again. I was visiting a client a couple of weeks ago, and the UI team is over in the corner, and the personas are on the wall in the corner of the UI team, and there's like 8 Scrum teams in the floor with no personas. I'm like, okay, we're going to do something pretty easy. We're just going to move those posters over here. And they're like, oh yeah, great idea. So the, I guess my point, David, about the one tip is, people don't have to get it right. And in fact, I'm going to go back to that analogy because I've been finding it so helpful lately is, you may not always have the perfect screwdriver for the task. So you kind of make it work. Like sometimes the blade's a little too big or the blade's a little too small. Yeah. And as long as it's not grossly incorrect, it gets the job done. And so, when Jose and I are teaching, or JP are teaching, is usually we tell people, if you can narrow it down to 3 or 4 frameworks out of the, maybe a couple dozen that could apply, just pick one. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be, perfect to provide an impact or value. And I think that that's an important tip because we want to lower the barrier to improve the collaborative process.
So that's just brilliant advice for life generally, isn't it? I always find it's so often it's better to do something at all, than to try and wait until you've got everything absolutely perfect. And I guess that applies as much in this context as
Aristotle
as anywhere else.
Smart.
Apparently, yes. So, and you guys, you do teach together. I know, Jose, both of you got a course coming up in Edinburgh, is it?
Yes, actually we are. Yeah. We're all attending in Lean Agile Scotland Conference, so we decided to put together a class. We've done it a couple of times together with third party here, JP as well. So we're going to be in Edinburgh having a couple of days exploring different collaborative frameworks.
I guess if anyone can make that, I imagine it would be absolutely fantastic and great fun as well. I get that just from chatting to you here. So, hey guys, thank you so much for your time. Really interesting topic. And I'm also looking forward to the chat on Twitter later this week as well.
We'll be on Twitter later on this week.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Cheers.
Thank you, David.